We'll be talking about human resources selection today. Your presenters are myself, Zach Gorman, Jennifer Gordon, Lindsey Brown, John DuPont, Greg Stevens, and Ryan Clore. What we're going to go through today, a little agenda for our presentation is I'll be talking about preliminary interview, selections test, employment interview, the reference background checks, selection decision, and then finally the job offer and final selection. What is a preliminary interview? Why companies use it, how they typically occur, and how you can prepare for it are things I'll be talking about in my part of the presentation today. What is a preliminary interview? Really, a preliminary interview is the initial screening process for an HR. Kind of get a feel for who you are, typically conducted over the phone. It's really short and to the point. It's more just how to get to know you and what your interests are. It's often referred to as a courtesy interview. It's really a good public relation exercise, gets the company's name out there, gets you more familiar with the company. It's really informal. It's not like your typical interview, go in suit and tie. Like I said, most of them are over the phone. Purpose of it really is companies receive dozens of applications, hundreds, for a single job posting, so it's really a good way to narrow down a lot of candidates into a select few and really determines who will make it to the next round of hiring. The information covered in the preliminary interview is general overview of your resume, your CV, or even your PMF. Goes over your educational qualifications, work experience, really just an overview of the job and what you're applying for. One way they go are telephone screenings. Best thing about telephone screenings, it reaches a wide variety of people. It's globally, you can get people from all over the world. They're quick, efficient, low cost, and they're extremely casual. Like you said, you don't see anyone, it's just a short conversation over the phone. In-person screenings, though, they're typically conducted by HR in larger companies or hiring managers in the smaller firms. Really allows the employer to judge your chemistry, see if you would be a good fit with them. It's all about making a good first impression with them. That's the main focus. I'll take you through a walkthrough of the preliminary interview, like how they typically work from an HR perspective and from employee's perspective. Really, like I said, you want to review the applicant's resume, CV, or PMF. Things you want to do is go over the job posting again and again, create questions for the employee, make sure you have enough for the interview. If it requires a certain level of experience, form questions around that. Most of these questions will really help weed out who is qualified and who isn't qualified. It determines who will move on, makes the candidate feel comfortable, kind of gets to let you know them. You introduce yourself, who you are, what company you're representing. It's really a good time to set the tone of the interview. You want to provide background information about the company to the applicant, inform them of any imminent company changes, discuss the company's business plans and goals, really let them know who they're working for and your plans for the company. Then you want to describe the job, where it's going to be held, where they'll be working, who they'll be working with, really tell them the importance of the job for the company, that you want to make sure they feel important, like it's worth their time too. Most of the time, you want to explain the interview will be conducted based on information provided on their application. Like I said, it's not really a formal interview. You're just going over what they said and some of their resumes and stuff. You want to describe how you'll be conducting it, how long you expect the interview to take. Make sure you take notes throughout the interview. Really go over what they're saying, make them aware of this so they don't really feel uncomfortable if they see you writing things down. You want to record things such as like their related experience, communication skills. You want to ask basic questions about the applicant, education, work experience, certification or licenses. Make sure they have anything that will make them more qualified for the job than others. Have the applicant describe work experience and their roles in their previous companies. Another big part, you want to let the applicant ask questions. That's the main thing. You want to let them see if they have any questions about the job, the company itself, about you even. State when you'll get back to them. And really, you want to thank them for their time and interest in the company. What you want to do to prepare for a preliminary interview is professional. You want to be really professional. Like you don't want to show up in like jeans and stuff. You want to be well groomed. You want to make sure you research the company, know what they're about, their history, what they do. Make sure you go over your resume. I mean, I know you wrote it, but it's really good to go over it and make sure you're really familiar with everything. You want to have a list of questions for the employer. Don't bring up salaries or perks or anything unless a job is offered to you. You really want to be concise and to the point. You want to try to oversell yourself. New with me, I had to go. I'm a park ranger. And I had to go through a background check, and that was just filling out something online with the thing. Really, the preliminary interview for that, I met with the director of the park. Really informal. I mean, he showed up in shorts and t-shirt. We just went over everything. It was actually pretty good. Very informal. Next up, Jen Gordon is going to talk to you about selection tests.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jen Gordon, and I will be going over the second step of the selection process, which are the selection tests. So today I'll be going over what exactly selection tests are, 4 different types of selection tests, and then finally how they're going to benefit the employer and also benefit the employee or the potential candidate for a position. So first, what are selection tests? Basically what they do is they're going to assess a candidate's ability to perform cognitive specific tasks for a certain job. They also help to determine reasoning skills, abstract thinking skills, personality traits, and a person's mentality. It's going to be going over all that, really dissecting who a person is. There are many different types of selection tests, but I'll be going over 4 today. They are aptitude tests, personality tests, ability tests, and then finally integrity tests. And I'll be going over each one in more detail a little bit later on. So the very first one are aptitude tests. Now what aptitude tests do is they measure work-related cognitive ability. They're actually the most commonly used in this type of environment, and there's 2 different types. There's an abstract test, and there's also a logical reasoning test. Now the abstract test, that is something where it's really going to determine how you can think abstractly. This is actually an example of something that you may encounter if you take one of these tests. They really like to see if you can think outside of the box. To some companies, that's actually really an important quality. Now, on the other side of things, there's the logical reasoning test, and that's almost the complete opposite. So that's just really going to measure your ability to draw logical conclusions based off of statements, facts, arguments, or questions. And this is just an example of a question that you may see on a logical reasoning test. Next, we're going to go through another type of test, which is a personality test. I'm sure everybody here has heard of a personality test, maybe has taken one. It just basically determines your behavioral style. So are you a leader? Are you persuasive? It's not commonly used, however, because a lot of people can just make stuff up. They don't have to be truthful. The most commonly used personality test in the workforce environment, however, is the occupational personality questionnaire. It helps you determine the best fit person for a specific job, and it also identifies future leaders, and it can also identify strengths and weaknesses of a particular person. The cool thing about the OPQ, though, is that it doesn't just strictly label somebody as one thing or another. It may take your relationship with people and it'll dissect it. So it'll say, if you like group work, are you more controlling or are you more easygoing? The next type of test is an ability test. They're very similar to aptitude tests, but they're more job specific and they test more individual skills. These are used mainly for jobs that are very peculiar and need very, very important and specific skills. So examples of ability tests would be like a role-playing activity. You may be a hotel manager and they want to see how you can deal with customer complaints. Another example could be if you're a fireman and they want to see if you can get in there and physically operate the equipment. The last type of tests are integrity tests. Now these are just basically to help the employers manage the risk of a potential employee. They want to know, is this person going to be reliable? Will they follow the rules? Will they tell the truth? With integrity tests, again, they're not as common just because people can lie on these. There actually are 2 different types. There's a personality-based integrity test where they actually measure individual traits. And then there's an overt integrity test where it's going to measure attitudes towards certain behaviors. So for the personality-based integrity test, they're going to measure individual traits related to rule adherence. So they're going to test for things like conscientiousness and perseverance. And they're going to see how they enjoy the company of others and try new activities. It's all about the personality traits. Whereas the overt integrity tests, they're mainly going to measure certain attitudes towards certain behaviors. In this case, they're looking for attitudes towards counterproductive work behaviors. So they may ask questions like, is it okay to lie to your boss even if it's something very insignificant? So now that I went over 4 different types of tests, I'd just like to point out that in the selection process, selection tests are very early in this process, and there's a reason for that. They help to benefit the employer and the employee because they're so early. So you may wonder, how do they benefit the employers? The biggest reason why selection tests will benefit the employers is because you may have a huge pool of applicants, but if you apply these selection tests, they may limit the amount of people that will move on to the next round, and they may not be as qualified. So you're eliminating people that aren't potential candidates. Now the candidates need these tests because they attain information that interviews may not. They actually can identify people for potential promotions, and they're also unbiased most of the time. Now for my new and you, I just recently applied to an internship for Power Home and Remodeling, and before I even went into the interview, I was administered a personality test. And I had to circle different traits that I thought applied to me, and they actually were looking for certain traits for me to work for their company. Now, summing up everything that we talked about, I talked about selection tests, the different types, the fact that they enhance your performance and your mentality, the fact that they're beneficial to everyone, for the candidates because they're unbiased, and finally for the employers because they're going to limit the amount of people that go into the employment interview. And up next is Lindsay Brown with the employment interview.
Hi, my name is Lindsay Brown. I'm going to be talking to you today about the employment interview, the different types, and some of the examples of questions that may be asked during these. Some types are screening, we have stress, targeted, a lunch or meal, which is more casual, committee, we have structured versus unstructured, we have multiple interviews, situational interviews, and finally there's also a group interview similar to the multiple interviews. A structured interview is the interviewer will come up with the questions ahead of time. They'll sit down, they'll prepare their questions, ask the candidate, still seeking that ideal candidate for the position, but it's very structured ahead of time as the title says. Some examples might be, tell me about yourself, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, why are you interested in this job, how are you qualified, are you willing to travel? They're all very basic questions for the interviewee. Another type is unstructured. It's very similar to the structured interview. The only difference is the questions are not prepared in advance. So the person that is conducting the interview will come up with them on the spot. They're still seeking that ideal candidate, except it's just not as structured in the sense that it's come up with on the spot. An example of multiple interviews, we have more than one interview per candidate. We have different representatives. They all have different questions on different topics. At the end, they all come together and discuss the qualifications as a whole. A group interview, there's more than one interviewer at once. Occasionally, one may act as a stress interviewer, which I will go in after this, but this usually consists of more than two people in the interview together. Another example is the stress interview. The interviewer usually will ask questions that might upset or put pressure on the interviewee. They might be uncomfortable questions. They might intentionally interrupt them while speaking to see how they handle the situation. It's always incorporated with other interviews as the structured interview. Some questions might be, we can't pay you more than you received in your previous company. Do you still think this job is worthwhile? How do you feel about working 20 hours a stretch? They're all questions that make you react right away under pressure. Screening interview is preliminary. It's usually on the phone. It's very basic questions just to determine if the applicant meets the basic qualifications for the job without delving too deep into it. It's followed up with a different type of in-person interview. Some of the questions might be, what are you looking for in this job? What attracted you to this organization? How do you apply your skills? Strengths and weaknesses. Once again, this will be followed by a structured or unstructured. Targeted interview, the questions are directed toward key qualifications for success on the job. So the interviewer will pick specific qualifications and delve deeper into those ones. Some questions might be conflict resolution questions, teamwork questions, motivational questions, decision making, strategic thinking. They create hypothetical situations to see how the interviewee will react in these situations to the targeted questions. A lunch or meal interview is similar to a structured or unstructured. It's just in a casual setting. It still has the same professionalism as any other interview. They say stray away from messy food choices, obviously, to keep that professionalism. A committee interview, there's several decision makers asking questions and providing hypothetical situations. Make sure you address each question. Make sure you show reasonable examples of how you'd handle each situation, and address each member of the committee as they ask these questions. Other advice would be position yourself upright, maintain eye contact. You want to adjust your energy, and especially make sure you know all the people in the room before you come into the interview. A situational interview. Simulations are performed similar to the job. They're going to see how these applicants will respond to these situations. They go hand in hand with structured interviews. The only difference is they are putting you on the spot to see how you would handle specific things, such as what did you do in your last job in order to be